The Howling Dark is such a good book. There are flaws we will get into. And yeah, we're going to stick with spoiler free for a minute before we jump into the spoiler filled section of the video. But I just want to say, well, this idea is fresh in my mind because I like to end a book the same day I review it. I literally just finished Howling Dark, so that feeling is in my gut and I can project it onto you all, the audience.
Do not, I repeat, do not do that.
What I want to say, my big final thought as I got to the end of Howling Dark is there are so many books, so many stories that have asked me to draw parallels between their protagonist and some magnificent historical figure, usually conquerors, right? That's something that tons of authors like to tell stories paralleling because they're inherently enticing. But Howling Dark and Christopher Rocchio's exploration of Hadrian is the first sci-fi epic to ever make me stop just wondering like, oh yeah, Alexander the Great, that's a cool parallel. He was a great guy, you're a great guy. What's this story gonna be? And instead think about how flawed of a person Alexander the Great must have been to end up where he is. Because it's not a normal person who is able to conquer Greece and then expand their empire throughout. Right, that takes an insane level of ambition and a disregard for other ideas and established rules. Right, you need to be the kind of person who is just willing to bulldoze through everything to solidify and expand your own power. What kind of person actually does that, and what flaws in their personality would be something that the people around them have to deal with day in and day out? That is where Howling Dark and its character study of Hadrian thrives and lives. And if you are tantalized by just that concept, get into Sun Eater right now.
Immediately.
Because it's the series that is having its final books put out. And in my humble opinion, there is no better time to be involved with a series than when it is wrapping up. And I'm saying all of this knowing I'm only 2 books into a longer series, and it could completely crash and burn at book 3. But even if that was the case, I would still recommend the first 2 books of Sun Eater. It's the kind of thing where I am so inspired by seeing Christopher Rocchio do what I find to be a better Paul Atreides, a better Anakin type setup, someone who is destined to bathe the stars in blood. Let's get into it. Let's start.
And here we go.
Balancing things out, let's get into some of the criticisms I do have of Howling Dark. For its first half, Christopher Rocchio falls into a formula for his storytelling, his world exploring, that is blisteringly apparent. There's this kind of Hadrian goes to an interesting place, the reader learns a little bit more about the world, and a zany character provides a path to another, even crazier place with a more zany person where we, the reader, get to learn even more about the world. And it got to the point where it was bothering me. That absolutely does exist in the first half of Howling Dark, though it is largely saved by the ideas and concepts of this world being bat around, being interesting enough that the entire time my imagination is just running wild, and the world is feeling vibrant enough that I now have as clear a picture of the Sun Eater world as I do Red Rising, and that's really saying something. And with Sun Eater being Sun Eater, all of these ideas, all of these concepts are then painted over with Hadrian's flawed thinking. I'm not saying he's an idiot, I'm not saying he's a fool, but he is a clear enough written character for us to understand that everything we learn about this world is tainted by his eyes, his view on it. And that's why other characters come in like Switch and Valka throughout this book to balance it all out and give us, if you're really paying attention, kind of a more well-rounded view of how events are actually taking shape. I lost track of how many times in this book I had Hadrian saying some really interesting ideas on a concept that is fully understood in the text, but at the end of it, I think to myself, wow, what a self-righteous prick. And I don't hate Hadrian. Please keep that in mind with everything I am about to say. I would get on a ship with Hadrian. I would follow him into combat, despite what I'm about to say in terms of seeing his flaws. He is interesting enough, he is charismatic enough, and he is capable enough that, like, even if I knew what I knew, if I was in this world and I saw Hadrian about to go on his campaign, I'd be like, I'm gonna regret this, but I'm in. And I have no idea what the author, Christopher Rocchio, thinks about any of this stuff. And that's the real level of disconnect I crave in a first-person perspective. I think one of the biggest Achilles heels of writing in first person is actually, as an author, consistently remembering you are not telling the story from your perspective, and you are telling the story from your main character's POV. I don't think there's a single sentence that Christopher has forgotten that in Howling Dark. It was a little bit there in Empire of Silence. That flaw is grown beyond, and we're seeing an improvement of an author even from just book to book. There is one other criticism I do want to bring in here. There's a point in the series where our protagonist is speaking to a, keeping it vague enough to be spoiler-free, life form that is greater than, and there's a use of the vagaries of, you know, threats and things along those lines, the theys. Jesus! And with language and communication being so at the heart of what was explored in Empire of Silence and still continuing on here in Howling Dark with the Cielson and all of that there, it feels a little bit like, aren't we better than just having like a vague they that's not then immediately explored? But it's a plot device that we're so used to, and it does get addressed and justified in the text enough that it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would, but it's certainly there. And then finally, there is thick plot armor around Hadrian. Undeniably so. But I disagree with the idea that Hadrian is a Mary Sue. I don't believe you could read Howling Dark and say that about Hadrian, because the guy fails. He pisses people off. He does so much putting his foot in his mouth and making rather simple situations more complex than they need to be because he's a stubborn jackass, that the people who call him Mary Sue, I will say, yeah, certain things he probably shouldn't have survived, and events shouldn't have gone his way that did. Some of that's addressed in the text, but I think there's a pretty big difference between someone who stumbles into success screwing up along the way versus someone who never makes a mistake and is a complete Mary Sue. It's a misunderstanding of what is what. And if you go back into the lives of tremendous people from history, that's kind of how they end up at the top, right? People overcoming just situations they should not be able to, just thinking of crazy things in the moment that happen to pan out, or odds randomly rolling into their favor. That's a real world fact. That is something that does lead to tremendous people in history. Yes, Napoleon had a brilliant mind for tactics, but he also wasn't in control of every single beat of every single moment on the battlefield and relied on other people and random chance going his way. The world is random, and some people luck out to just come out on top, 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 to then be propelled to the likes of, well, let's talk about that later.
He says I resent you for being a self-made man.
And one of the big things for spotting a Mary Sue, in my opinion, is not having real ramifications for their actions, which, again, does not hold up when it comes to Hadrian. There are severe consequences to his actions. Keeping it vague, there is loss of friendship, betrayal here. That is a direct result of him making decisions that aren't objectively right or objectively bad, but they're tough calls. And so, yeah, he faces backlash, physical, emotional, and external, all of which, in my opinion, really go against a Mary Sue argument, because I would count many of his decisions to be mistakes. The real crux of it comes to the point that I think people are forgetting this is a first-person POV from a story from a character who has a massive ego. And so we are spun some of these events as if like, yeah, he came out on top and made the right call. But even then, not always. Hadrian isn't so blinded by himself that he thinks everything went perfectly, and instead he falls apart and talks about his regrets ad nauseum. A prime example of this is repeatedly throughout this wider galactic set series, there are people who, you know, come to a conflict with agendas. They sit down in a meeting with a specific set of goals. And one of the flaws of Hadrian is he doesn't really give a shit what your goal is, what your prerogative is coming to a table. And instead, he's just going to, as bluntly as he can, point out what he wants, why he thinks it's right, and step on toes all over the place, no matter if it makes people in the Empire mad at him. And he refuses to acknowledge, no matter how high the stakes are, that yeah, he might be in the right, but the sacrifice call might not necessarily be worth it, as many people who are zealots for themselves tend to do. He's so much more like Crispin in this book, and I think actually in Empire of Silence, I just didn't pick up on it, than I originally realized. Him and his brother, they share far more similarities than I think Hadrian would be comfortable admitting. And it's through this like bluntness of who he is that Hadrian ends up like surprised by the consequences of his actions. Wait, this didn't turn out exactly how I wanted and not everyone's happy, but like we were going for the right thing. Yeah, but you handled it like a brute, which is not a criticism of the book. That is so ridiculously human. And if you read stories about like great historic figures, it seems to be a shared common trait among them. Bullheadedness. Getting into another admitted flaw of this story though, especially in that first half, there is a structural problem where Christopher Rocchio does like to just kind of through events. As soon as you have what you need information wise, he'll just skip on to the next thing. Some people I see online are saying these books are too slow. I just really disagree. That might be all to personal preference. I would like them to be even thicker and longer.
Puny. I like them big.
And what makes this the most jarring is Christopher Rocchio has pretty purple prose. I love his prose. I actually think it's one of the strongest elements of the series. But if you're someone who then takes these kind of flowery prose and is really wanting to get through them, that could become a really big problem for you in Sun Eater as a whole, because there is this early on juxtaposition in the story where it's like, we're really getting through things here, except everything's being described really flowery, and so it doesn't really mesh immediately. I will say though, the problem there is not the prose. I'm addicted to how Hadrian tells his own story. It's so fun to see someone in hindsight who understands they've messed up horrendously, but is kind of getting off on telling their own story, go through it all with you. It feels so honest, but only as honest as Hadrian can be with himself, even in this perspective of like, oh, he's telling the story from in the distant future, which I guess you could then use to justify, like, that's why some of the structure is just burned really quickly through, because him telling the story just wants to get through it. It's a flimsy excuse, but it's one that I want to acknowledge. But let's pull back from that one character though, and talk a bit more about what is happening thematically in Sun Eater in book 2. The value of human life, life as a whole really, is unavoidably due to the warfare going on and the specific conflicts more directly happening person to person at the forefront of Howling Dark. It's not inadvertent though. That inevitable idea we see in so many series is expounded upon in a greater way, because this is the closest I'm going to get to talking about a direct spoiler here. There are people who live for so long in this universe, but it's not enough. That's why there's billionaires.
They're greedy.
1 million isn't enough. Living for 500 years isn't enough. No matter what, the greed within us wants more. It's like how our mind is naturally conditioned. You don't really meet a whole lot of people who just go, oh, I'm completely satisfied, no matter who they are. There is an innate desire within us, at least from the thesis put forward in Sun Eater, for more. It's an integral part of humanity. It's a stronger desire than that to like keep ourselves whole, which is again brought directly into the themes here with the classic Theseus ship bantered about, as well as with our warfare with people that we consider to be brutes, playing back into the whole, like, this is a retelling of ancient Greece and Rome. There's nations are reflected in, you know, how Hadrian and his empire view the other. Granted, they really are brutes in some ways, and that's so often done in greater sci-fi stories where it's like, oh no, humans are the brutes, not the aliens. But in reality, in Sun Eater, no. The humans are horrible, don't get me wrong, but the Cielsen, and like, they're I'm gonna say they're worse. They eat, we're their cattle, and I can't say humans are worse than that. We typically draw the lines at eating humans, and as a human, I'm gonna say people that eat humans are worse. Although granted, we eat animals that are like considered pretty intelligent as well. Oh, damn it.
You're on a whole other tangent.
But getting back to this theme of greed, Hadrian clearly hates this. Like, he does not like the greed he sees in others around him, but in a very different way, he is also perfectly guilty of it. And I like that kind of narrative joke, right? Because it's true. I see other people who are greedy for money, right? And I judge them. I don't think I'm a particularly greedy person specifically for money, but I am for other stuff. And I'd be an absolute hypocrite if I did not acknowledge that. I'm greedy for views. I'm greedy for books. I'm greedy for other things that I have deemed really important for myself. And so while Hadrian judges others for doing this Theseus ship type swap, whether it's for tech to try and gain immortality, he's doing it too. He's sacrificing so much of what I think he would have originally said is like sacred so that he can continue down what he is more and more feeling like is a religious type quest for him. Prediction wise, which is just a prediction, I don't know, so I don't consider it a spoiler. I think we're about to see someone become like a almost cult leader within this empire and then just cause all kinds of hell. And
that sounds good, right?
I don't know that's the case, but the language being used and the positioning of Hadrian at this point, that is yeah. All right, we'll get into one more flaw though here. Not flaw, but something I could see bothering some people. Christopher Rocchio is handling, surprise, there's a romance here, in a way that feels very much so like an early 2000s or a 90s fantasy or sci-fi romance with how it's being executed, but a great version from that time period. I really love what's happening with Hadrian and his heart. It's just a very male-centric, self-centered POV on that romance, which again is just fitting and justified in the text, but it's there. Like, it is what it is, but I actually think it's the right call creatively. I'm gonna end the spoiler-free section here by kind of evolving the recommendation of Sun Eater. I originally was just saying like, yeah, if you like Red Rising or so many other fantasy series, King Killer, that you can pull parallels stylistically from, you should probably check out Sun Eater. I'm also going to add to that list Berserk, surprisingly. This is a story about an individual going through hell and forming emotional bonds while kind of feeling like no one's ever fully their peer. Tonally incredibly different from what's happening with Guts, but if you like, how is this person going to survive against these all odds dark, awful world with so many twisted ideas and manifested existing physical embodiments of those ideas living in the world around them that they have to go up against? Sun Eater's gonna be for you as well. For a numbered rating, I am giving Howling Dark a 9 out of 10. The first half has its stumbles, but it's more than made up for in the second half, and I cannot wait to talk about spoilers with you in 3, 2, 1, switch. There's so many things I could talk about in this long book, but the conflict with Switch, I think, is one of the best conflicts I've seen to emphasize a flaw in a character in a long time. This is something that I think was incredibly deliberately done. Switch made a bad call. Like, I do agree Switch should not have done exactly what he did. He should have done something, arguably, right? Like, Hadrian was in a really bad spot. He was in prison for who knows how long, but Switch sold him out to the Empire. Like, and Switch is really trying to come to terms with that. But how Hadrian handled that conflict was awful, because Switch is right in the actual conflict they're having with each other. So Hadrian is now out and retaining some of his power, which felt a little convenient at times. I couldn't get into that spoiler free, but like, yeah, part of that plot armor that's around Hadrian is like full ramifications for his actions do happen. But when it comes specifically to like versus him in the Empire, especially at the end, it feels like, okay, they're really letting you go. But I don't care that much, because on that personal level, it feels like these conflicts are wearing away at Hadrian's soul. And he's telling Switch, like, their death is on you. Like, you're the one who made the call, and putting so much blame on him. Yeah, he did. But also, Switch is right when he's like, I'm not necessarily a devoted member of the Empire or a member of the military. I'm terrified, and people have already died up until this point. So I did what I thought I had to. And the way Hadrian handles it, fucking asshole. Hadrian is a giant.
You shut your mouth, or I shut it for you.
Hadrian, I understand being mad at him. I'm not even saying Hadrian needed to welcome him back into the crew. It was the brutality of which he dismisses Switch that I find to be so unacceptable, because Switch is still a human being. And like, you have to remember as a reader, put yourself in Switch's shoes, where the person who you are a friend of, someone who has done incredible things you are here for, is gone for a long period of time. You don't know what the hell is happening to them. He made a judgment call, a very human one. And Hadrian is essentially saying, you made a judgment call I can't handle, therefore you are not my friend. And again, he has every right to be mad, but then putting it all on Switch, unacceptable. It's my favorite display of Hadrian's ego yet, because it does have that tinge of justified, of understandable human reaction, but an unacceptable one. And there's other calls that are so ruthless from Hadrian at times, where he's like equally deciding things that could have ramifications that go far beyond the ramifications of Switch's call. Like, he gives away Cielson blood. He doesn't fully understand or know what's going to happen there, but he's making a call. And it's a call I actually really disagree with him on. I think that was a bad call. It's giving away a precious material to someone you will not have control over. And yeah, we see like ramifications of decisions like that for Hadrian smack him in the face hard. And him to be then so judgmental of someone else, put in an equally difficult situation, really made me not like Hadrian in a way that makes me love reading Hadrian. And having those such personal, like, heart on the sleeve moments where, like, right after his conflict with Switch, Hadrian's crying still, like, which understandable, I would too. But then he turns around and reflecting this super flawed side of Hadrian, this personal failure of his to overcome his ego, is then immediately juxtaposed with Lysander, a member of the Empire, a member of people who really should be his enemies still at this point, bowing down, kneeling to Hadrian and treating him like he's something above a man, and seeing then other people start chanting Hadrian the half-mortal, him being deified, lifted up. That is what I'm talking about when it's like what is to come, the pain, the path, with also the just whole narrative framing of this. It's Christopher Rocchio, you are a genius. And there's something so specific about the choice in that moment where Hadrian is out on the, I think it's a catwalk, right? And all these people are chanting and cheering for him because he has died and come back. And so, yeah, he's getting this like mythic status, and Valka does not come out into that light. I think it's specifically phrased, if I remember correctly, it's like she stays in the shadows and is like, no, I'm not coming out there. That is such a delicious choice that immediately makes my mind just begin theorizing and setting up, because Christopher Rocchio has done such a good job of paying off little things like that, where if you pick up, I mean, that one's a little more obvious than some, they pay off. Like, this guy is not just shoving fluff into his scenes just to feel like more dramatic. There's deliberate framing, foreshadowing choices. And I don't know if that means like Valka's gonna betray Hadrian. I don't know if that means Valka's gonna die. I don't know if that means Valka is actually like somehow masterminding, puppeting this or something along those lines. It's just tasty.
You're a very odd man.
I also just want to say that every single conflict in this book was so much stronger than the one before it, and evolved a lot of the times to be better in hindsight. I thought first reading The Painted Man, I was like, this is kind of weak, but then we have Lysander and Hadrian getting into this conflict over continuing the mission, which I thought was substantially stronger. Of course, this goes to the rescue mission, which was really well executed, and I think it actually played out the best it could in terms of tension. There was a little bit of like a shoehorned, rushed in romance for Hadrian, but the way it actually kind of plays into what's happening emotionally, I like. And it was a way to show his maturing as this adventure has gone on as well. But from there, obviously, we get this immortal and how it starts elevating into elements that can come across so corny and so lazy if they're not handled well, specifically with like, okay, we learned that there are like ancient aliens turned into gods speaking through time and tipping the scales in certain ways. And I can so see how like that would come across horribly, but it's all so well played into the actual conflicts that are happening now that it just feels right. Like, it feels like the World War II level politics versus down in the trenches type fighting, where it's every bit is a cause chain reaction. Like, I sound like a madman if you don't know the context of exactly what I'm talking about, but it's like how you can geek out about your biggest, thickest fantasy sci-fi book, and because you've experienced this wonderful journey, those crazy details end up being a story that is so effective in pulling emotion from you. And my God, I love Hadrian and I love this book. Speaking of tasty, that's not a transition I want to stand by, but let's talk about the romance here. The romance between Valka and Hadrian is not like the most perfect. I mean, there's certainly tinges of just Hadrian's own view tainting how it ends up going down as a reader, but I still really adore it. I totally understand why someone like Hadrian, someone with this ego, would end up falling for someone like Volca, someone who's a bit more distant, someone who, she just kind of is silent at times. She is not super expressive, and Hadrian being Hadrian fills that in and projects onto her a ton, which is something that so many people do when they like accuse women of being like mysterious or something. But smartly, Christopher Rocchio contradicts Hadrian at times with that and shows Volca has this whole side to her personality that Hadrian just hasn't been picking up on at times. The only side of it I don't 100% get is Volca fully falling for Hadrian in reverse. I get why you would. I mean, he's getting like a cult of personality around him. He's someone who saw his own headless corpse as he died and was brought back. Like, yeah, people are going to be attracted to that. But Volca doesn't strike me as someone who's attracted to just power or anything along those lines. And I get Hadrian is super charismatic. You can fall for him for that way. He's also super tough, very smart. There's a lot of reasons that someone could do that. The chemistry from Hadrian's side, I buy. The chemistry from Volca's side, I'm just struggling with a little bit more. But all right, let's get more into the conflicts throughout this book, which there's a line that to me, like, it summarized all of it, which I have written here. Forgetting it is the soul that craves knowledge. We are seeing at various stages on their journeys so many characters who set out wanting to know more, wanting to solve problems, and they sacrificed everything, or they're in the middle of sacrificing everything to get it. I would even say you could put this on people like Lysander, but it's always taken note of throughout the narrative, like what people are going for and how much of themselves they have lost. There's the utmost extreme of this when we see someone who has achieved immortality, the third player, or fifth player, however you want to phrase that. And then there's people who seem like they're smart enough to step off before things go too extreme with Switch, which is kind of contradicted with him still wanting to join with Hadrian at the end. But I attribute that more to just Switch not knowing what the hell to do with his life if he loses Hadrian and this family he has there. And even in this book, we see Hadrian going from being completely revolted by the people who have given up so much to not empathizing with them, but having a perspective where he's listening more intently, and it feels like the beginnings not of a corruption arc. I don't think Hadrian will ever intend to do evil, but it's the beginning of an extremist. It's the beginning of someone who wants to be an Alexander the Great. I mean, his middle name, Alexander, is emphasized right at the end here for a reason. The end result, Howling Dark, has this Hadrian the half-mortal, people praising him being deified, but all I hear in the distance are war drums sounding doom, a level of bloodshed that even after all these wars, even after 900, I think they said, colonies have been taken by the Cielsen who eat people, even after that level of bloodshed, it's just going to be an exponential set off, because I think Hadrian is being set up to shatter what order there is. And if there's one thing we know from history, there can be horrible systems in place that need to be overthrown. But if you are not incredibly careful and nearly perfect in overthrowing that system, what you bring can be so much worse. And Hadrian is not a perfect leader. He is not someone who can take apart a system and implement his own and there not be a hell to pay. That is my full thoughts for now on Howling Dark. This is one of my new favorite series of all time. Christopher Rocchio, keep writing. And like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and let me know what you think of Sun Eater or Howling Dark or Empire of Silence in the comments down below. And check out my book, Neon Ghosts, if you want to support my own writing. You can get it still physically on BackerKit. We just sent off a bunch of the tip-ins after I signed them all, and now I just need to sign some bookmarks, and you'll be getting them for too long. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.